presentation from Tanya Gigliotti and Madison Franker with Dr. Heather Fitzsimmons-Frey.
All right. All righty, just give us a moment to get my screen shared with you guys. All right, can everybody see that now? Yes, okay, perfect. Excellent. Madison Franker, her, and Tanya Gigliotti, me, under the leadership of Principal Investigator Dr. Heather Fitzsimmons-Frey, who's in another screen somewhere down there, are proud to present as part of the Young People Are the Future project, Hard at Play and Leveling Up Dress Up, Girls, Their Books, and Living History Museums at the Mundanity of Girlhood Conference. Thank you to the Girlhood Studies Collective for accepting us, and to our partners, MacEwan University and Gatherings, and museum partners, Fort Edmonton Park, Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Village, and Calgary's Heritage Park. Since 2019, the Young People Are the Future project has been researching youth engagement in living history museums in the province of Alberta in Canada. This research has primarily been conducted through interviews with youth volunteers and youth staff and those working in creating and implementing programming for young people at these museums. We are curious about what happens when young people living in the present, so often expected to represent a community's future, represent the past when in the space of a living history museum. We wonder, for example, about how present-day youth are engaging with the past, what it is about the performance of the past that interests them. What are they choosing to focus on? What histories and stories are they choosing to question and to bring with them to the future? And why do they become so passionate about this in the first place?
So you are probably thinking to yourself, what is a living history museum? These museums recreate historical settings with historical buildings and are often animated by interpreters who are often, although not always, in historical dress to simulate a time in the past or several time periods. Our three partner museums, they all focus on different parts of history. So Fort Edmonton Park, which is located in Edmonton, Alberta, they focus on 4 specific time periods. So 1846, 1885, 1905, 1920, and then as well, their Indigenous peoples experience focusing on Indigenous history. The Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Village, which is located just outside of Edmonton, Alberta, focuses on Ukrainian immigrants to this area. So looking at early Ukrainian settlement in East Central Alberta up until the 1930s. And then our final partner museum is Heritage Park, which is located in Calgary, Alberta, and they focus on time periods from the 1860s all the way up to the 1950s with different buildings focusing on different time periods. Now, in these institutions, young people can play many different roles. Quite often, young people are attending these museums as guests, so that'll be with their family and their friends, sometimes as a part of a school field trip, or they'll come for day camps or overnight camps where they get to spend more time at the museum, or they can even hold special events like birthday parties that they can choose to have hosted by the museums. And then, of course, young people can also work as interpreters, which can be volunteered or they can be paid staff. An interpreter, for future reference, this will be important, is somebody who communicates in these museums with the guests about what is going on in the museum exhibits. We like to think of it like a language interpreter, but instead of translating a language, they're helping guests understand the history and understanding the buildings and the artifacts that they're looking at. As I mentioned before, and as you can see in the pictures, the interpreters will sometimes be in historic outfits, but they don't always have to be. Interpreters will also lead different activities in the buildings and in the exhibits, and we call those activities programming or programs. And that can be everything from a highly structured field trip program all the way to more of a drop-in style, like come and go activity. So lots of different opportunities for young people.
I'm probably doing the wrong thing.
There we go.
Almost every girl and non-binary youth we talked to told us about how certain books have both led to and then fueled their interest in history and in working and playing at these living history museums. The majority of the books they listed were part of a series. Dear Canada, Our Canadian Girl, Anne of Green Gables, Little House on the Prairie, those were the big ones. Though these are books in which the daily lives of girls feature heavily, their tasks, their leisure time, schooling, families, friends. the land, and sometimes or often in the background, some of the politics and history of the time. Series usually do play a large factor in children's reading, but certain genres appeal more to certain young people. As an outsider to living history myself, who was more into sci-fi fantasy series when I was younger, I'm curious about what is repeated and where the interest and the joy lie in these historical fiction series. We currently have a research assistant on the Young People Are the Future project who is an insider. She read those books and now she works at Fort Edmonton Park, our very own Madison Francoeur. We thought it might be interesting to ask her directly about the books and the interpretive tasks and activities she and other young people do at the park. We know Madison cannot possibly represent all girls, but felt her story might shed some light on the ways these books and these museums come together for a great girl community. There are critiques of this serial repetition in children's books, and those are important. But for today's presentation, we'll be mostly looking at where the fun lies, what sparks joy, what brings the sustained engagement and the interest that leads these girls to not only read, but then do. We take a lot of our questions from ones that were brought up as we read Reimer et al.'s Seriality and Texts for Young People, The Compulsion to Repeat.
And I'm going to stop sharing the slides because now Tanya has some questions she'd like to ask me.
So, Madison, can you tell us about what you do at Fort Edmonton Park?
Yes. So I've worked at Fort Edmonton Park since 2022. And in my role there, I am what we call an education interpreter. So my role is primarily leading field trips and summer camps and day camps with kids. So people will book a program with me, whether that's with their school or with their family. And then I show up and I lead them through a very highly structured activity that's related to one of our time periods.
Nice. And so if you could tell us a little bit about your own history. Yeah.
So my background, I am Métis on my mother's side of my family. So I have connections with Indigenous history in Canada, but my family also has immigrant history as well, going back several generations now. So I have connections to a couple different stories that we tell when we're talking about, you know, Alberta. Well, I'm technically not from Alberta, but from Canadian history anyway. So I have family members, for example, who would have taught in one-room schools. In fact, my great-grandma she taught in a one-room school, grade 1 to grade 9 for several years. So I have strong connections with prairie history in Canada. So getting to work in these museums, and I get to tell all the different parts of my history, but I get to tell them to young people today, and I get to make it fun and exciting, because I have to be so honest with you. It is way cooler to get to go into a one-room school building and actually sit at the little tiny desks and draw on the chalkboards than to, you know, be told about it in a presentation, which unfortunately is what everyone gets to hear today. I promise it's way cooler in person.
Yes. Yeah, I guess we could have tried to get into one of those buildings, but I don't think their internet connectivity is actually
not very good.
Yeah. And so were you, I said before that you were one of those girls who read those books.
Sure did.
Which ones grabbed you? What do you remember most about them?
My favorites were, I loved Little House on the Prairie, all of them. That entire series, I probably read it like 100 times. That was a series that I read. I was probably like 7 when my mom read it out loud to me for the first time. And then I learned how to read on my own chapter books, and then I read it. And I also loved the Dear Canada books, which they're a bit more, they're less of a continued story. Every book has its own contained story inside of it. But what I really loved about those books, to be so honest with you, I don't remember for the most part the details of the historical events that the girls were going through. I mean, I know that they happened. Like, I know I read a book about like the polio epidemic. I remember reading a book about that, or the Great Depression, or different or historical events, but I couldn't tell you what year they happened. I couldn't tell you oftentimes where they happened, because there was a long time ago now. But when I remember the books, I remember getting to read about what outfits the girls were wearing, and where did they get their outfits, and what games were they playing with their friends and their cousins and their siblings. You know, what food did they get to eat, and who made the food, and when did they go to the beach, or they got to go to the city for the first time. It was those, you know, very basic parts of life that I was like, oh, That's really cool. I'm going to remember that, 10 years later, for some reason, it's going to stick in my mind.
So some of the things that you were talking about, like baking and things,
Mhm.
there appears to be a bit of a gendering of daily life in both the books and the history
Mhm.
itself. Can you talk about how that makes you feel or how you deal with that
Yeah.
at the museum?
A lot of the work that we do, it is tasks, it is activities that, if we look at it from today's perspective, we would see them as very gendered activities, right? It's, cooking on the wood stove, it's washing laundry, it's, carding wool, like turning wool into thread. It's activities that you would typically see, women at home doing. And that's the same activities you would often read about in the books, like the cooking and the cleaning and everything. And for a while, I am the type of person who, I don't want to be, a stay-at-home person. I don't want to be just doing all this stuff at home. That was very much the attitude I had as a kid. But these books are still so exciting to me. And I think part of what makes it so exciting now is that I don't have to learn how to cook on a wood stove. I don't have to wash my socks by hand. But now that I get to do it for fun, it stops being, I mean, it's work for me, but when I get to bring young people in to do it, it's a little bit less about um, the necessity of the work, even though it is actually like, required tasks that must be done. It kind of gets to have that sort of angle of fun to it, right? Kids always tell me, my favorite part of today was when you made us wash socks. And I'm like, that's crazy, because that shouldn't be the most fun part of your day, but it does. It's like the novelty of it.
I'm going to skip ahead to a particular question because you just mentioned this, but like, it sounds like these daily tasks and activities have significance now. And what is important to you about the tasks or the books?
I think something that's important to me, one of it is like, obviously, of course, getting to remember the history of, like, for me, connections with, my family, that I can pinpoint the people in my family who would have, immigrated to Canada, or who have always been in Canada. So part of it is getting to directly connect to those histories through the actions that I know that they did, and that I can now pass on to people who are younger than me. And part of it is also, I guess I would say it's sort of the ability to choose what I want to do kind of plays a part in it. I personally don't love to chop wood. I can do it. It's part of the activities that I get to do at work, because we need wood to start the fires, to cook the food in the stove. But that's not an activity that I want to do. And historically, I would have had to do it because somebody had to chop the wood to start the fire to cook the food. But now that we get to do it, there's a lot more freedom, there's a lot more control and agency over what we're doing. So I can pass that task on to somebody who prefers it. And, I can be the one who's teaching kids how to wash socks, because I think that's a lot more fun. So there's a lot of agency and control over these, like, very, they're necessities. This is like a repetitive life task that you always have to do every single day. Historically speaking, now it gets to be a fun thing that I'm choosing to do.
Right. And so you just talked about the repetition. And so, as you mentioned, like the tasks are repetitious, the historical fiction series are repetitious. Is there joy in that repetition?
I think there is. I know it's not for everybody. Not everybody who comes to a living history museum or reads historical fiction is going to think that it is the most exciting thing ever to read the same story about how they went to the general store and they got the cloth and they used the cloth and they sewed the dress and then they have the dress. Like, I know that's not exciting to everybody. It's not exciting to repeat these very, very mundane tasks and activities, but for some of us, it is exciting because it allows you to kind of take a closer look at history. It allows you to live the history, living history, but it also allows you to kind of explore parts of history that it can kind of become very personalized to what you're interested in, and what things, yes, they're repetitive, but it's okay because I like it. I like to cook on a wood stove. That is so fun to do. I like to show kids how to do laundry because I think it's funny to watch them do it. To be totally honest with you, they do it terribly. They're not very good at it. But it's fun to get to show young people these skills that they don't get to do in their everyday life. And for them, it's not so repetitive because they come for a field trip. But for me, I find that joy in getting to share it over and over again. And like, yes, it's historical and it can be kind of boring for some people, but isn't it fun when you actually get to do it?
Do you think that doing these tasks over and over again, what does it do? Like, do the task itself, does it limit the does it free? Like, do you know how you?
I think it adds a little freedom because I get to do it a little bit different every time with every group of people that I do it with. And that's kind of the fun to me, is every time I interact with the public or with young people, it's a little bit different because every group of people is different. And that is something that has always been really fun to me about living history, is the way that different people choose to interact with it, and how they view the repetition.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think that's all the time we have.
Yes.
And thank you so much.
Thank you both for sharing that really fascinating research. Next, we have Dr. Brenda Herbert.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to try and share my screen and hopefully it'll work. So play from the start. Oops, hang on. Then why the chat? Can you see my screen? And is it just the slide, or can you just see everything?
I can see everything.
Okay. Oh, can you see the chat? I'm not sure. Oh, hang on. Okay. How about that now? All good? Oh, great. Thank you. Thanks for those nodding. I am not I'm not very techie, and that was part of my problem because so I'm going to tell you a bit about myself. I'll go to the next slide. This avatar is actually made from one of the children who participated in my PhD research, and it was about I am a therapist by training, and what I wanted to do is do an ethnographic. Well, I didn't start off wanting to do an ethnographic study, but I ended up doing one to find out the everyday lives of children, and then, like the first speaker said, COVID-19 hit. So rather than being in person, I had to do a variety of online activities, and has the restrictions stopped, then I went on and did in person. So I had to get really techie savvy quickly, which caused a lot of fun for the children because they were always streets ahead of me. So as a therapist, I'm sorry, I don't know how to take the box away. Does that? Oh. Sorry. So as a therapist, I often felt that the system that was supposed to help children often misunderstood them. And so I wanted to, rather than just see them through the lens of trauma and abuse, I wanted to see them in their everyday and what was important to them, and what was kind of gave them joy, because often what's portrayed for children who've experienced abuse is that they're damaged, is that they can't relate to people well, and that they've got a doomed future ahead. But actually, as we know, children can thrive, and with the right support and social economic justice, they actually can go on to live very livable lives. Oops, sorry. So I had 7 children join before COVID-19 hit, and 3 children joined during it, and there were 7 mothers. So I did the ethnographic research from February 2020 to August 2021. And so there were 6 girls and 4 boys, and all the children came from a marginalised group. Either one or both their parents were from a country that had been colonised either by Britain or Europe, and they were all on the lower social economic ladder in London. So a big part of it was actually the playground. Because of COVID-19, I had to meet them in the playground when I could, when we were allowed out of our homes, and so that's what I'm going to start to talk about, because the playground was a big part of how they built social relations, and also how they had fun. A big part of that was also about, taking risk. And that's sometimes something tricky to talk about when we're talking about children who are marginalised or who've experienced abuse, because they're often quite policed about what risk they take. But yet risk is very much part of fun, and definitely in the playground I could see it. At first there was Rosie. So I'll read some of the ethnographic vignettes. There was Rosie who loved playing it. I don't know what you call it in other parts of the world, but in London, it is a game where somebody's it and you have to chase the others and try and tap someone else. So then they're it and then they chase. And so Rosie used to love playing it in the playground. She was 5 years old, but she had an older brother who was part of the study as well. And she always got frustrated because she was smaller, she'd always get caught. So she didn't like that. And so she used to make these rules so that it would even out the play. And so for sometimes she would just call homie, anything was homie whenever she needed a rest. And what was quite interesting, because at the beginning, she'd get frustrated. And so then I would, decide to run slower. I would make sure that I catch her brother more than her. And she would, call homie and be safe whenever she wanted. But as the year went on, she grew faster and I grew slower. And then it was like, oh, she didn't like that as well, because then she could easily run away from me. And so it was kind of like being caught easily was no fun, but never being caught also was not fun either. And it was kind of the challenge and the risk that she liked. It was the thrill of the chase. And I think that's, something that's really important to think about when we're thinking about fun for children. And when we talk about risk and fun, one of the things was an older participant in the project, Katie. I'm not using anybody's real names here. The children chose their own pseudonyms. And so Katie was telling me about an incident. We were sitting on this swing that you can actually see on the slide, and she was telling me about this incident that happened. She says, I hurt myself here once. I had begged my mum to bring me to the playground. She was busy, but still she brought me because I begged and begged. I was so happy when we got here. My friend was here. We both went on the seesaw. We both like to be extreme. And here Katie giggles and she continues, we kept going faster and higher, and then she has to be more extreme, and she jumped off and I went flying and I cut my head open. I had to go to hospital and everything. I got to go in an ambulance. There was blue flashing light. I remember I was wearing a Mickey Mouse Disney top and there was blood running all the way down it. Look, she says as she points to a line in her forehead. See, that is where I cut myself and they had to put stitches in. And I think, and Katie loved this story. And for me as a therapist who's very much been taught about reducing risk, it was eye-opening for me, and I had to double check myself so that I was aware of not keeping children in their place, but actually really paying attention to what gave them joy, what gave them a sense of joie de vivre in their everyday lives, even though at times my training of reducing risk was at play. And I think that is something, an important lesson for me. Another incident where I had to keep myself in check was actually with another girl called Esmeralda. And with Esmeralda, one of the things she had to do was to actually navigate racism within the playground. And so what she did was that she went off with her sister in the playground and they were doing a video for me of their time in the playground. But as soon as they saw some friends from their school, this is when children weren't at school. So actually there was a big excitement about seeing their friends because they hadn't seen their friends from their class for a long time. Due to COVID restrictions, there was a big excitement. So they left the filming, they left the video, and actually they started to play in the playground. So one of the things that I noticed with Esmeralda was that there was one girl in this little group that she joined who kept asking her, "What's your name? What's your name?" And it was like she couldn't get Esmeralda's name, even though later on when I spoke to Esmeralda, she said to me, I said to her, "Oh, who's the girl in the middle?" And Esmeralda turned to me and she said, "Oh, she's in my class." And I wondered, and my heart sank, because in some ways it reminded me of when I was at school, and and people would ask me my name. They would often assume, you know, when I was little, and this is like where playground racism comes in, that because I was of Asian heritage, that my name somehow would be unpronounceable. They wouldn't even try. So they would often say to me, "Oh, we can't pronounce your name," even though my name is very anglicized because of colonial history. So it reminded me of that. It reminded me also of my dad, who had to change his name. And so when I was writing up my ethnographic study, I got fixated on you know, the racism and overcoming it. But actually, when I returned back to Esmeralda and I talked about it, I had to like challenge my own idea about it, because actually for her, I had reduced her in that moment, but actually she was using her own kind of like savviness and her own way of dealing with the racism by just ignoring it and carry on and playing, and not allowing this girl to dampen her joy of being with her friends in the playground. And so it's kind of like looking through the children's eyes about how they navigate social relations, rather than just me imposing kind of a social justice crusade for them, but actually really paying attention to the mundanity and actually, you know, the small things of their everyday lives. So one of the things that that I found during my ethnographic studies was that birthday was really celebrated in the homes. So all the families had experienced domestic abuse and all of them, it was only the mother who was in the home, and they were all on, you know, either living below or on the poverty line. But yet birthdays was a real source of joy, and they'd make a lot of effort for each child's birthdays. And when I spoke to the mothers said, oh, they would always make it special because each child was special. And that really contradicts and goes against some of the narratives around lone parents, and also of parenting in marginalised communities, and also communities living on the poverty line. I know in the UK there's a lot of literature that kind of like pathologise families, but here the families were showing their great strength. And also, like, a lot of them took their food vouchers and they went to the supermarkets and they would buy sand and they'd bring it back home, and they'd create little beaches on their balconies or in their gardens for the children, or by little paddling pools as well, because, you know, children weren't able to go out. Some of them got pets, but it was just like that, like in the everyday lives that they showed that, you know, despite the social and economic disadvantage, that actually, you know, the mothers and the children really tried to continue to have fun and to have play. And they often, you know, kind of challenged the negative stereotypes that often prevailed in the literature that I found around domestic abuse. And online and offline lives merged as well. So this was a little girl who did a online kind of home she created, and also this was her dollhouse, and she would often talk to me and move me from the online version of her home to the dollhouse to her real house. So it was kind of like it was all merged. And it was interesting because this family, the children weren't allowed to see their father because of safety issues, and yet this girl who had never seen her father because the family had to escape the domestic abuse when her mother was pregnant, actually created a room within this house for her father, which I thought was quite interesting because she'd never seen her father, but yet in her online world, she had created a room where he could stay safely and they could stay safely. So it was actually how they navigated kind of like their inner and outer world in both the online and the real life ways. So what did I learn so far from my research was that it was really important not to pathologize the girls and the boys in the study, and that it was really important that I checked my interpretation of their play, because I could very much come in heavy-handed with my social justice or my therapeutic kind of mandate, and actually I needed to put that aside to really listen to what the children were saying and to learn from them, to avoid going down the usual tropes about children who've experienced abuse. And also it was about to pay attention to the mundane and the everyday, because I think that's when you really can get a sense of children, and also humanize children, because often it's the tropes that speak louder than the embodied child, and also that play and fun doesn't happen in isolation of social and economic injustices, and that they have an impact on one another. And sometimes I know some of the things that I've looked at is how pleasure for families who are on the margins of society, how they can have that can be quite policed heavily, and also that playing with risk is part of the fun. And so if we take too much risk out of play, actually it makes it less fun for children. So that was my timer to say 15 minutes is up.
Great, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. Next we have Breland Jankitla, and that's our final presentation. So Breland, take it away.
Hi, I'll just get my screen shared here. Okay, can you see okay? All right, perfect. So today I'm presenting on my dissertation project that I have been working on for the last forever, it feels like, and it is actually titled Too Much Pink, Little Girlhood and the Media, or Barbie and the Mediatization of Little Girlhood. But this is before I titled it. So it's She's Everything, Little Girls' Perspectives on Being Like Barbie. And so today I'm going to talk to you an overview of the Barbie vlogs, which is what this is kind of focused on, the focus groups that I did, and then reflections and contributions on this study overall. So first I wanted to mention some guiding scholarship that has kind of helped me along the way. And there's obviously so much, but 3 things that were coming to mind as I was putting this together were Catherine Driscoll's Girls Today, which studies the figure of the girl at different time periods. That was helpful to me in thinking of how do we think about who the girl is and what does she do? Who is she in society? Another one is Fiona McDonald's Childhood in Tween Girl Culture, and this was really influential to me in methodology, where in her study, she talked to girls about cell phone use and what they do with them. And she asked them about rules for the cell phones, but she never asked the parents, which was something that I kind of took into my study, where I only talked to the girls and I never asked for any input from the parents about YouTube or them watching the Barbie vlogs. And lastly, I selected Rebecca Willard's Constructing the Tween Digital Market, which goes over tween identity formation in terms of it being constructed for them by websites and how tweens kind of construct versions of themselves on websites, and thinking of little girls and how do they start to construct who they are as a girl. So first I want to introduce Barbie. Although she is an icon, this new Barbie Roberts, who debuted in 2015, she's 17. She lives in Malibu with her mom, her dad, Skipper, Stacy, and Chelsea, who's formerly Kelly. And she has many friends who often guest star on the vlog. So there's Ken, Nikki, Harper, Ryan, Renee, all kinds of people. And the 3 things that I think are her main traits are that she loves expressing herself, she's extremely curious, and she often engages in self-reflection and thinks about who she is and what she does with people. In these vlogs, they're 2 to 4 minute videos of Barbie sharing her life that she posts on YouTube. Oftentimes they take place in her bedroom or her home. Rarely is she outside of her home, but in the second half, she is outside of her bedroom more, but a lot of it is in her bedroom. She uses her platform to do challenges like making cupcakes with Ken and talking about topics that are important to her. One thing that is notable about the vlogs is that at the end of every single one, she says pace, which means positive attitude changes everything. And that is something that she reflects on regularly throughout her vlogs. The three main themes in the vlogs that I've kind of indicated are friendship, self-expression, and cultural awareness, which happens in a couple different ways. So when it comes to friendship and self-expression, these are two of like the most important things that Barbie does in her vlogs. So throughout the vlog series, she has her friends on, she talks to them about who we are, how well do we know each other. She often promotes these relationships and how important they are to her. And she expresses often how important it is for her to share how much she loves them. She's always thinking of ways that she can reach out to them or be good friends to them. One also important thing about friendship is that Ken is her friend in the vlog. He's not her boyfriend. However, he very obviously has a crush on her. I think it's implied that she likes him back, especially more towards the end. They are engaged in maybe one of the greatest will they won't they arcs of our time, if you are interested in that. In terms of self-expression, Barbie is constantly engaging in self-expression or talking about how much she loves finding ways to express herself. She does this in a lot of ways. Recently or early in the vlog, she says she takes up like cosplaying just to like show her interest for stuff. She DIYs clothes that have things that she likes on them or things that like express her friendships. And she like makes a lot of stuff. Always pretty much she's worried about expressing herself. That's one of the reasons that she says she loves fashion. And in all of the ways that she lives, like through meditation, she's reflecting on herself and expressing herself in some way. So her leisure time often is about expressing herself or being productive. I don't think she's really ever leisurely. The last important note about Barbie, I think, is the cultural awareness that she reflects on in her vlogs, which I think is something that Mattel has purposefully brought in for Barbie to do to make her a more modern role model and make her more well-rounded. And the three ways that I have indicated this are highlighting other cultures, discussing issues that affect women and girls, and responding to social issues. When it comes to highlighting other cultures, Barbie will just reference them kind of generally. In an early vlog, they do family holiday traditions where her friends share different traditions from around the world. Barbie's favorite is Kwanzaa. Teresa likes one from Oaxaca, Mexico. Ken engages in a Japanese tradition of eating fried chicken on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. And then later on in the vlogs, Ken teaches Barbie a Bhangra dance with that he learned from his friends, Chai and Shivani. He says they're a great teacher and he talks about kind of the importance of that and they reflect on that. And so in many ways, it's kind of just incorporated. She also, however, discusses issues that are close to women and girls. Specifically, she talks about the sorry reflex. She has a whole vlog on it, and she has a vlog on the dream gap, which has impacted her sister Chelsea at school, where a boy thought she was like dumb for wanting to have multiple class presidents instead of just one, and she doubted herself. And so Barbie was upset and reflecting on this. She also has guests on the vlog like Misty Copeland. She talks about Katherine Johnson, the space pioneer. And so she's always reflecting on like important or influential role model women. Lastly, she responds to social issues in two ways, I think, through discussion and acknowledgement. So when it comes to acknowledgement, this is really notable when it comes to the pandemic. So in 2020, she kind of addresses COVID without ever really saying it. So she has social distanced vlogs with Ken's, which I think is the only time we like see into his bedroom. She discusses making sense of a new routine, and she finds ways to connect with her friends through distance instead of having to be with them personally. So she acknowledges it, but she never says COVID. However, when it comes to discussion, one thing that she does is when it comes to racism, after George Floyd was a few months later, she had her friend Nikki on the vlog, and they discussed it, and they talked about things that had happened to Nikki that hadn't happened to Barbie, and it was because Barbie was white and Nikki was black. And one thing that is notable about this vlog is that this is one of the only ones where Barbie does not say pace at the end. Instead, she says people need to stand up and start discussing things and work on it. She does not end with the idea that positive attitude changes everything. And I think that was really notable there by Mattel and Barbie as well, in terms of what is important and how do we address this. Okay, so that is like my overview of the vlogs. There's like 200 of them, so I could get into them way more deeply, but focus groups are the other major part of my project. So in this project, I connected with a Girl Scout group that had girls ages 5 through 9 in it, and I held 2 focus groups. I would have liked to have more, but I'm in a pretty small area, so these were the participants that we had. And so I attended 2 meetings. Each one had a different focus group. We had a brief discussion about teens and Barbie, and then I would show them a vlog, ask them, what did you think of this vlog? What did you like? And is there anything you didn't like? And I repeated that for 2 other vlogs. And then at the end, I asked them, would you want to be friends with Barbie? And when you're Barbie's age, do you want to be like her? These are the 2 questions that I was really trying to get at, to see like what they were interested in when it comes to being a teen girl. Do they kind of think about that at all? And how do they approach it? These were recorded with audio, but not video, and I collected just as little personal data as possible just to get them to focus on this and protect the privacy of young kids. The 3 themes that I've kind of pulled out so far, as I'm still going through this data because I just did it kind of in the middle of February, so I'm still going through this, is appreciation for Barbie's self-expression in her activities, maturity and too much pink, and then a field that I am calling miscellaneous, yet to be named as I go through this. So in the 2 groups, the girls expressed an interest in wanting to be themselves. They really liked Barbie's attempts to express herself. They liked when she was doing activities to do that, and they really liked her and her friends' wide range of interests. So in one video I showed, it was Barbie's friend Renee was on there, and they were doing a friend tag. Oh, I forgot to say this. The 3 vlogs that I picked are ones where Barbie's directly addressing the camera instead of doing a challenge. This is because I wanted them to be reflecting on who Barbie is and not watching her do activities. So they were interested in her wanting to be herself, and they picked up on smaller details about that, like I like soda, but Barbie doesn't like it because she tells a little story. So they reflect on her interests. They think about how Renee probably skateboards and they want to do that. However, they were just sometimes overwhelmed by how much Barbie was chatting about it. So even though they picked up those smaller details, they weren't as interested in her chattiness. They also expressed maturity when it came to Barbie dolls. They expressed whether or not they liked the vlogs. There was one who did, one who didn't. A lot of them did like watching the video, but many of them agreed that they were getting too old for the Barbie doll themselves. They also were reflecting on her activities and thinking, when I asked, do you want to be like Barbie? They said, yes, I do, because she's so active. And another said, no, because Barbie says being yourself is important and I just want to be myself. So there was kind of that takeaway as well. Aesthetically, 1 girl out of 10 said there was too much pink. She was not interested in how much Barbie likes pink. And when I asked her if she wanted to be friends with Barbie, that kind of discouraged her because it was just too much and overwhelming to her. Things that I thought were interesting were that almost no girls commented on the way Barbie looks outside of thinking she was beautiful. They were more interested in her personality than her physical appearance. And a lot of them, or some of them, didn't like the talking style, and they said all she does is chat, 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 chat. So that is something to think about as well when it comes to the vlogs and the type of media that kids engage with as I like move further with this type of study. My reflections on this include the limitations I had a pretty small sample size and it wasn't very diverse. It was pretty much all young white girls. So when I think about if they were interested in her body or how she looks, it could be that they were not really interested in that because they all look like her. So having a more diverse population would be really helpful in the future. The developmental gap too between ages 5 and 9 was very evident. So I think splitting them up in the future would be really helpful. And the location of where we were at their meeting was kind of distracting. So I think doing that differently in the future would help. I really like that there were preformed groups of girls who knew each other, and I and my advisor were the only strangers, and there were familiar adults close by that made them feel safe. I also liked that the Barbie media was already appropriate for them, so I didn't have to worry about kind of stressing to parents that it was, but I did give them the links beforehand to make sure that they could approve if they didn't want them to watch the videos at the meeting. If I was going to do this again or if someone else was going to, I would recommend that people separate them by age or grade level, have shorter time periods, or try to do a study where you could be there for a longer period of time and observe. And alternatively, provide them something to do with during the study, but I'm split on this because it might just distract them. And then fewer girls in each group. One of my groups was bigger and it was harder to manage, and the other had, I think, only 4 girls, and it was much easier to manage. So having that smaller group was really helpful. I think this can offer a lot of study to the field of, or to girl studies. It speaks directly to girls about what do we think about being an older girl, surveillance, what are they learning about the performance of girlhood and womanhood, and then it follows the expansion trend that I kind of have indicated in the field, where you write about a new age group, teens and tweens, you study how they consume culture, and then eventually we're studying how each group creates cultural texts. And I think with the advancement of technology and kids having more and more access to it, they are able to create text. So if we think about it, kids are contributing to culture. So for example, we have Sophia, Grace, and Rosie, who were widely popular. The apparently kid, Noah Ritter, who is still referenced when people are like, apparently. And lastly, kids are interested in making media. So I'm going to try to show these short videos if they work, where my little sister went on to try to be an influencer.
Sure, I will try to make the taxes less when you buy something.
So that was in 2016. She was watching that, and then in this one, she is.
Hey my Lucky Charms, it's Lucky Lady LPS here, and today I am doing a cover video for Taylor Swift's song, Our Song. So I'm giving her all the credit for this song, and you should totally go check out her music. So.
And that is really the last thing I wanted to show you, is that kids are interested in that. Even if we don't think so, like they don't have access to it locally, they're making culture. And I'm just really interested to see how do they start to do that. So thank you for your time. That is my time.
Thank you so much, Breland, and thank you again to all of our presenters. I'm excited to get into some conversation. We have just about 10 minutes, so I'd love for folks to either raise your hand and I can call on you to come off mute to ask questions, or you can put questions in the chat. I'm happy to read them off for you. I will start with, there was a couple of comments. Let's see, there was one about the 50th anniversary celebration of Little House on television. And so one question that kind of, and seeing sort of the emotional responses that some of our participants had to the anniversary, I'm kind of curious to hear more about maybe the role of adult nostalgia kind of in these, in these projects or in these worlds, and maybe like some of the things that you're bringing into the project and how you're kind of reflecting on that as well. And that's for Madison and Tanya.
There you go. Hi, sorry, not my computer. Yeah, nostalgia does play a big factor in living history museums. There's no way to get about it. And it's been a really interesting thing to see that there are people of the age that actually lived through certain eras that have nostalgia for that go to living history museums. But there are a lot of young people that are talking about nostalgia being a factor for them for times they never
Yeah.
times they never, I think it's called secondhand nostalgia. And it's fascinating to watch that and to see how they have a nostalgia for a time they never lived in, and that they didn't have a ton of, but a ton, like, and that these books are usually the first introduction for these time periods. And I don't know, it might, and there's not enough research on this, but it might be that the museums make them nostalgic for the books.
And their childhood, when they first read the books.
Even though they're still like often very young.
Yeah.
The 16-year-old will often think that when they were 9 is a long time ago. And so, yeah, they're nostalgic for being 9 and reading those books. I don't know if that answers the question. Sorry, Madison.
No, that's great.
Yeah, no, that's a great response. It's really interesting to think about kids experiencing nostalgia for childhood while they are already children, and the ways that that kind of complicates the work that you're doing. So thank you for that. We had another comment in here from Catherine towards Breland's presentation. About how Catherine also met girls to know how they perceived media that was created for them specifically as part of Catherine's master's thesis. And then just commenting on how amazing it is to see how they interpret media and how they pick up on things that we didn't catch on to, which is a great segue into a question that I had, which was wondering about to what extent your research is maybe thinking about, critiquing, engaging the idea that Barbie is like teaching girls essentially safe bedroom behavior or safe private space behavior of how to be online. And whether that's something that the girls commented on, or like even the part about Ken becoming a friend and not a boyfriend, because you can't have a boyfriend in the bedroom, right? So I'm curious about like what kind of engagement the girls had with those ideas, or what your critiques were.
I think Barbie's room really is like a safe space for her, and she does like comment on that throughout the vlog series with her sisters, where she says like I can't film in their rooms without permission. So like when she does a house tour, she just shows pictures of them. Like she doesn't ever really go into her sister's room unless they say she can. So she does protect that privacy. When it came to Barbie's bedroom, the girls mainly had comments on like how it looked cool and how some places weren't very tidy, and they were like, oh, I'm not gonna be that clean, and like I just like want to like have stuff like her or keep my puppy in there. So they were like interested in the ways that she kept her room and being in it, but they didn't comment a lot on like the safety of it, if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's really, really interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
Am I allowed to put a question forward to Brenda?
Yeah,
I don't want to jump in. Oh yeah. I just wanted to say, when I was doing my PhD a number of years ago, I had a similar outsider experience during an interview of that sort of that risk protectiveness sort of kicked in. I was like, oh, protocols, this thing has happened that like it shouldn't, and all that sort of thing. And it's really difficult to navigate. So I really appreciated you mentioning that, because that was something that I personally experienced, and I was just interviewing kids on what they read. So it was not even a context where it was expected. So I wondered if you'd be okay talking a little bit more about how you sort of methodologically work through sort of that challenge of, the sense of duty of care and responding to that young person, but also not wanting to swoop in, and when they're kind of advocating for themselves or trying to claim a risk as something they've conquered, not actually stamping them back down into being a victim, because that was a hard thing that I had, and I think it's really important. If you know how to do it better, I'd love to know.
Oh, I think that's a great question, because I think that's a constant dilemma, isn't it? I think in any research with either children or any groups of people who are marginalised, I think for me, I think the hardest bit really was when things got a bit more tricky with social services, and the families might not have been getting the service that they are entitled to. And it's then where my professional hat would come in, and I'd be thinking, wow, because they'd be told things that are certainly, you know, not professional. What saved me in a way is that the project had a safeguarding lead who was based in the in London. We have like local authorities, so I don't know what you have in Australia, but so there was somebody based there who I can refer to, always with the permission of the family, and so that I could be kept separate as a researcher and not then be brought into kind of report writing for social services, but so that person could take it on and advocate for the family. So I think that saved me. But there were many times where I just went to bed really anxious. So I think that's why there's not much research done with the group, because I think it's, there's lots of ethical issues, isn't there, in practice. But thank you.
Thank you for that question. We have a question in the chat, but unfortunately, we don't have time to answer it. But we're going to save the chats, and also this session was recorded. And also we have our Discord channel where we can maybe continue this conversation later. But thank you all for your presentations, and thank you all for everyone, to everyone who attended this session. And just as a reminder, our next panel, which is titled Girl Spaces for Pleasure Seeking, is happening soon at 3:15 p.m. Eastern Time. So thank you all so much. And I hope you join us for our next panel.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.